Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast. This episode has been brought to you by the Wine to Wine Business Forum 2022. This year will mark the 9th edition of the forum to be held on November 7th and 8th of 2022 in Verona, Italy. This year will be an exclusively in-person edition. The main theme of the event will be all-round wine communication, and tickets are on sale now. The second early bird discount will be available until September 18th. For more information, please visit us at winetowine.net.
Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast. I'm Cynthia Chaplin, and this is Voices. Every Wednesday, I will be sharing conversations with international wine industry professionals, discussing issues in diversity, equity, and inclusion through their personal experiences working in the field of wine. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe and rate our show wherever you get your pods. Hello, everybody. This is Cynthia Chaplin, and today I am thrilled to welcome Iris Rideau to Voices. Iris is a French Creole winemaker, a businesswoman, and an activist, but most importantly, she's the first Creole American winemaker to own and operate a winery in the United States, and she is widely celebrated as the first Black woman to own a winery in the U.S. She's just published her memoir, From White to Black, One Life Between Two Worlds, and we'll talk about that later. So, Iris, thank you for coming today. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you, Cynthia. This is wonderful, and it's wonderful to join you on Voices. I've been anticipating this for a few days, maybe a couple weeks since we last spoke, and I'm really anxious to be able to be a guest on your show. Thank you very much for that.
Me too. So, let's get down to business. You were born in New Orleans, and you're a descendant of a Frenchman who sailed to America in 1777 and established a plantation in Baton Rouge. And then a couple of hundred years later, there you were, growing up in a Creole ward of New Orleans in the 40s. And you've said there was not a great emphasis placed on education in your community, especially with Creole. What was that like for you as a child, being in a place where education wasn't a big deal and you were in the deep South? Tell me about that.
Well, first of all, in those days, we were under Jim Crow rules, and which meant the law read that we were separate but equal, but there was no equality for people of color.
Absolutely not. None.
We suffered suppression, hardships, lack of a good education, as you mentioned, all of these things, and the stories go on and on. So I grew up in a Catholic school, which kind of helped a bit. But again, of course, we got the hand-me-down books, and the nuns did the best they could. I loved going to Catholic school. It was primarily a Creole school. There were some Black kids, and I'd hate to make the difference or the distinction, but unfortunately, that's the way it was in the South. The segregation was so harsh and so severe. I mean, it meant that if you had one drop of Black blood in you, you were considered a Negro or colored.
I think it's really hard for people right now to realize what that felt like and to remember that. That was the 40s, and that seems a long time ago, but it's, there are still a lot of people like yourself with those living memories of what that felt like.
Exactly. I mean, it's something that never leaves you. You get to push it somewhere back deep inside your mind, but that little girl is still there. And I have to remind her from time to time that she doesn't have to save me anymore. I've got this, but it does stay with you. And so I feel like it's given me an opportunity to write this book, a story that is seldom told in this country. And in fact, we're getting more pushback on educating our children as to the history of America. And I always say, how can you solve the problems if you don't know what the problems are?
That's such a good point.
And we're still stuck, to some degree. We are still stuck. And again, I believe in the fact that we will one day be one, all looking like me, a mixture of everything, and there won't be any difference. However, it won't be in my lifetime, but we're all going to work hard to establish that and make that happen.
Well, you've been working seriously hard at this. And I have to say, for all of our listeners who haven't seen Iris, you need to have a look on social media, because if everyone looked like her, the world would be a beautiful place, believe me.
Oh, thank you.
But you said at that time when you were that little girl that you hated the South, and you couldn't try on clothes, and you couldn't look at white people, and you had to put your head down and step off the sidewalk. And you decided you wanted to go live near your father because he was in California by then.
Yes.
And so you and your mom moved to LA when you were 12, which is an enormous change from deep South New Orleans, in those days. How did that change affect you? What was it like in LA in those days compared to New Orleans?
Well, my father, as you said, lived in California. They separated when I was 2. But he came back to New Orleans for Christmas throughout my years. And he would always tell me about California and how much better the living conditions were there. And at 10, I finally convinced my mom to let me visit him one summer. And I did. So actually, the book opens with the story of my travel from New Orleans with my grandmother, Mare, who always passed for white. So we took the train from New Orleans to California, and we traveled as white, and we enjoyed all the luxuries of the beautiful dining cars and a bed to sleep in for those 2.5 days and nights. And my grandmother decided to stay in California, and I had to come back with my mother's black girlfriend. She could not pass for white, unfortunately, and I came back in the Negro car. And it was such a shock to me because there was no dining car for us. We had to eat and sleep on those hard wooden benches that didn't recline. And I really believe by the time I got off that train, I had suffered some form of PTSD because I couldn't even talk about it, and didn't talk about it until I was an adult. I didn't even realize it. I had denied it happening for so many years that I finally told the story, and I went, oh my God, to my friends. I'm like in my 20s. I can remember it like it was yesterday. And I said, you know what happened to me? This is what happened. I traveled as white to California and came back as black, going back to New Orleans. So it was those kinds of things that caused me to write this book.
I think it's great that you're, strong enough now, and we'll get to why you are, because you're so amazing, to talk about that whole period of time where passing as white was something that, a lot of people did. It wasn't uncommon. And it's just, looking backwards, in the rear view mirror, it seems so horrible. But as you said, it was something that gave you a benefit on the way there. And then as you returned in the black car, it was, a completely different story, which is just shocking.
Yes.
I know a lot of people listening to this won't remember that time, and it's difficult to imagine that. And, so you got back to New Orleans, and
yeah,
you ended up deciding to move to LA.
Correct. It took me 2 years to convince my mother that we needed to move to California and get out of the South. She hadn't visited California yet, so she really didn't know how beautiful it was and how much easier living conditions would be. But anyway, I did convince her, and we moved to California, and I had some somewhat tumultuous years growing up in California. I suffered from sexual abuse, which caused my grades to go down. I found myself pregnant at 15. I was running with the wrong kids, and I had my baby at 16 years old. And with very little education, my mother, who was then a single mom herself, said, you've got to go to work. And she was working in a sewing factory. So she put me to work in a sewing factory with her. Well, that day was literally the turning point in my life. It truly was. I looked at those poor, tired women having to suffer through this way of life, sewing on a pocket for 5 cents, a zipper for 10 cents, whatever. It was called a sweatshop. And I made so little money that first paycheck. By the time I paid for my babysitter, I had very little money left over. even eat. Thank God I was living with my mother. So I went back to school immediately. I marched myself back to the first junior college I could find in the neighborhood because I didn't even have a car at the time. And so I took night classes and worked in the sewing factory until I finished my education. And fortunately, the first job after finishing my business courses was working for an insurance agency, which literally launched my career. I stayed there for years, went back to school. I started studying principles of insurance. Now I'm at UCLA taking classes. And 10 years later, I opened my own insurance agency. So that was the beginning of my years in Los Angeles as a businesswoman.
And that was in the late 60s when you opened Rideau and Associates Insurance Agency.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that by then you weren't having to pass as white anymore. A huge relief, I guess.
Well, actually, I did have to pass, unfortunately.
Even in the 60s.
Well, this was in the 50s when I first went to work for the insurance agency. 60s is when I opened my business, but in the 50s, this would have been 55, mid-50s, I'll say. There were no front office jobs for Blacks, even in California.
And it's just shocking when you think of, all the Black soldiers that fought in World War II, all of the Black women that worked in factories, to think that even 10 years after the war, there were no positions available of any kind of power.
I know. I mean, but there was also segregation. There was also separation. Black people had their own, in the wars, they had their own stations. You remember the Tuskegee fighters that flew planes in the war? They were Black soldiers, not allowed to be in the same stations or housing with whites. So it took a while for this country to move because Jim Crow actually affected the whole country. It was worse in the South.
For sure.
But not certainly the rest of the country was also affected to some extent, to some degree. Mm-hmm.
Italian Wine Podcast. If you think you love wine as much as we do, then give us a like and a follow anywhere you get your pods.
Well, you did, as you started to say, you did manage to get to the point where you were ready to open your own insurance agency in 67, and you became really actively involved in seeking some better rights for all kinds of minorities, and you got appointed to the chairman, the mayor's Affirmative Action Committee in the 70s. So times were changing. What was it like then? How did you make the move from insurance and activism and human rights into wine? I mean, it doesn't seem like a very clear path, Iris. I'm telling you, it doesn't seem like a very clear path to me.
It wasn't quite as easy as that or as quickly as that, No, when I started my agency, it was shortly after the Watts riots, and the people in the neighborhood, in the community, couldn't obtain insurance or loans. It was called redlining in those days. So it gave me an opportunity to insure thousands of homeowners, which launched my career. And from there, I branched out into commercial insurance. However, there were very few Black-owned businesses in the 60s, late 60s and early 70s. So I began insuring nonprofit agencies, Urban League, NAACP, Drew Medical School, those kind of agencies. And then shortly after that, the Johnson administration created a war and poverty program whereby his intent was to elevate the living conditions of disadvantaged people throughout the country. So cities throughout the country received grants. The city of LA received a $50 million grant for this program. And fortunately, I was able to write the insurance specifications and I was granted the contract. So I caught the eye of the mayor at that point. So from there, I began to assist him with other business people in the community to establish the Affirmative Action Program for minorities and women. And that was really the beginning of the highlight of my career. I was now involved in politics, and then I went into the financial world and started my own securities company providing pension planning for employees of major corporations. And that was a nonprofit agencies, I should say. And then I was awarded the contract to provide investment opportunities and advice to the 30,000 city employees. So that was a deferred compensation program, a supplemental pension program, and it was strictly volunteer. But I did that for the next 20 years, and in total, I ran my two companies for 30 years. And then it was time to go north, and I headed for the valley of Santa Ynez in Santa Barbara County, and that was my second chapter.
What on earth took you there? What on earth, Iris? Honestly, I mean, the path that you were leading, sort of making waves and driving paths through industry, through politics. What on earth took you out to the Santa Ynez Valley? In 1989, you started off with just 6 acres. What on earth inspired you to decide you were going to go from all of this to wine? Maybe you needed some wine by then.
Well, I was drinking quite a bit of wine by then. I really, seriously, I always loved drinking wine. And the only thing really to do when you have acreage, and I purchased 22 acres adjacent to my home property after the 6 acres where I built my home. However, I was still commuting from the valley to Los Angeles. So I would go to my beautiful home in Santa Ynez, which I built on the 6 acres. And during that time, I commuted for another 5 years. I thought I had an exit plan for 5 years, but it actually turned out to be a total of 9. And during that time, I would go wine tasting on weekends.
Of course, obviously.
So I was in the valley on weekends. What else do? You go wine tasting. I fell in love with the whole process, and I wanted to open my own winery. Why not?
Well, it's pretty funny because it's been said that your success in the sort of very competitive world of vines and vineyards was super surprising because you didn't know really anything much about wine before you set up. What made you choose that, sort of particular place? And you were making kind of Rhone style wines with Syrah and Mourvèdre and Viognier. Why did you choose those wines? How did you create such a successful vineyard? I mean, obviously you're quite unstoppable, but what on earth? How did this happen?
Well, I was one of those evenings when I was here on weekends. I made friends with the winery owners and the tasting room staff, and someone had invited me to their home, and they opened a bottle of 1989 Chateauneuf de Pape. And of course, as you know, that's a Syrah Mourvèdre Grenache blend. And I fell in love with it. And I had never had a Chateauneuf de Pape before then. And of course, it was a perfect year for it. And so I decided, I said, I am going to, when I open my winery, I'm going to plant all Rhone varietals because I want to make a Chateauneuf de Pape. As a matter of fact, I even had a label that was called Chateauneuf de Pape. But the French put an end to that. They said we couldn't, as Americans, use their name. So I called mine Chateau Duplantier Cuvée, which is my family name. And I planted all the same Rhone varietals, Syrah, Mourvèdre, Grenache, Viognier. Oh, I love Viognier, which is a white Rhone varietal, as you know.
I love Viognier too.
Oh, do you?
I do. I have a soft spot for that.
Oh, we'll have to share some. I do too. I planted 6 acres of it on the front of my vineyard, and Syrah up on the hillside, and then the Grenache, Mourvèdre, and Roussanne I planted also. My Roussanne, by the way, took Best White Wines of the World in 2004.
That's incredible. So you created a little Rhone Valley up in Santa Ynez.
Yes, and my vines came from Beaucastel, France, the south of France. So at the time, Tablas Creek had formed a partnership with them and up in Paso Robles, and they started a nursery And by the time I was ready to plant, the vines were ready.
Exactly.
And so
Synchronicity.
I call that my God-given right, my guidance, my direction. I call it my higher self. It's not a God per se. It's not a he or a she. It's an energy force.
I love that. I love that. And I do think vineyards lend themselves to energy sources too, for sure.
Oh, they do. Oh, you couldn't get me out of my vineyard. I mean, my vines were still in the grow tubes, and I was still walking the vineyards, waiting to see when they were going to pop out of that grow tube.
That is a gorgeous image of it. And it's funny because since you started, you've managed to grow to 7,500 cases of wine per year. And you won Best in Show in the Los Angeles International Wine Competition. But it's interesting because I read a great quote from you where you said you brought your own culture to the valley with gumbo and Mardi Gras beads and the blues and jazz. So what were you doing once you got going up there?
Oh, such a good question. The property I bought had a historical Santa Barbara County historical landmark on it that was built in 1884. It had been abandoned for 10 years. When I bought the property, actually the house was really what convinced me I needed to buy it. Nobody wanted it but me. So it took me 2 years to restore it. And while I was doing that, I built a kitchen, a French country kitchen on the back of the house. And I put in a 5-star range and just everything I wanted, And finally, when I opened my doors, I started cooking. I loved to cook. And I started making Creole food. Just on weekends, a Saturday, I'd make a jambalaya or gumbo or red beans and rice. And I would pair it in the kitchen with a bottle of wine that I selected for the day, for the pairing. And it was an immediate success because back in the day, tasting rooms were just pouring wine, and not a lot of atmosphere, I hate to say, but it's true.
Some of them are still like that, unfortunately.
Yes, they are. But I knew that I wanted my guests to have the full experience of the life I was living and had lived as a child in New Orleans with my family, cooking all these wonderful dishes. And I always loved to cook. I was always at the kitchen with my grandmother and Leah Chase, the famous chef from New Orleans. And so anyway, that was my marketing plan. And by the time they finished having a taste of something I had made, and sometimes they had drank a bottle of wine by the time they waited for me to finish cooking it. They were standing in the kitchen waiting, and I would hang Mardi Gras beads on them after they purchased their wines to take on the wine trail.
Amazing marketing ploy. Cook something that takes ages to cook so that they all have to drink wine while they're waiting.
And that's exactly what happened. And I put in a beautiful country fireplace. And in the wintertime, I had the fireplace going. Can you imagine? And they're standing around the fireplace watching me cook, which I loved because I could cook and talk at the same time and tell my story. So
I think this is amazing. I can see it in my mind's eye.
Can you?
Yeah, I really can. And I think the fact that you brought your culture there is such a testimony to how, inspired you were to leave the South, but you didn't really leave it. You took it with you. I love that idea that it didn't get you down and you brought the best of it with you.
I did. I really did.
It's interesting. You also spent your wine career sort of seeking out other women and other people of color in the industry. And you said when you started, you couldn't find one single winemaker of color and you couldn't find any women. And you eventually managed to hire a woman winemaker.
Yes.
And then you attended the Hugh Society third annual Wine and Culture Fest in Atlanta, and you were an honored guest, and they've named an award after you.
Yes.
So I want to hear a little bit about this because you weren't just hanging out by your fireplace cooking, Iris. That's way too humble. You were clearly doing some other things.
I was doing other things, and I really have to extend my gratitude to the Hugh Society and to Hira Habibi for recognizing me as the first Black woman to own a winery in the country. And so with that, I have decided that I am going to be one of the spokespersons for the Black wine community, and especially young women of color. I want to encourage them to know that it's a tough field to break into because it's always been the exclusive purview of wealthy white men. And that's changing. And women are taking a stronger role today in the wine industry. And, I still hear stories being mistreated or neglected in tasting rooms when they see a person that has darker skin than mine. And I never experienced that. So I appreciate being their support, their trailblazer, and the one that's going to tell the story for them and lead the way.
So what sort of advice would you give to a young woman of color who wants to go into the wine industry now? What would you suggest?
Well, I have been suggesting to those that's already in the wine business that you can't ever let anyone tell you no. That's to start with. No is not the answer. No because you're a woman. No because your skin's too dark. No, that is not going to happen. You're not going to let that stop you from doing what your passion tells you you must do. And so you have to be strong. You have to take the ups and downs, and there's always ups and downs.
For sure. There are definitely, especially in this industry.
Yes. It's not an easy industry. By no means. It's always been snobbish, and that was one of the things that, because of my personality, I refused to allow anyone to work for me that was going to be a snob. I was on the floor, as a matter of fact, from day one until 20 years later, teaching them how to go about being hospitable, loving, accepting, and they are like that to this day.
Well, I'm so sorry that you sold this winery, because I'm telling you, I'd get on a plane right now and come work for you.
Well, you can come and have wine with me because I'm there all the time.
Absolutely.
So whenever you get here, we're going to do that.
Absolutely.
We'll start with a glass of Viognier.
Yes.
And end with a Chateau Duplantier.
Perfect. I cannot wait. I know that you recently published your memoir just a couple months ago, and I'm so dying to read it. It's very hard to get here in Italy, but we have a team now working on that for me. And as I said at the beginning, it's called From White to Black and One Life Between Two Worlds. So what's next for you now? You've written your memoir. You've had an extremely successful career, sort of 3 different times.
Yes.
Let me hear the big plans. I don't see a life force like you sitting down in a rocking chair. I really don't see that happening. What's coming up?
No, never. I will drop dead doing what I would love to do. No, I will never be in a rocking chair. As a matter of fact, I'm now on a book signing circuit.
Fantastic.
Literally. I mean, I'm getting calls from wineries, from bookstores. I'm reaching out to them. Everybody wants to hear my story. And so that's what I'm doing. And I can't move fast enough these days. It's crazy. But I love it.
Do you feel like you really smashed some of those barriers that you felt when you were a child?
Oh, absolutely. I really do. I saw it happening in my tasting room when people would cross my tasting room, a white couple, to go and speak with a black couple and vice versa. And I would listen to them.
That's incredible.
Yes. And the people that didn't like it didn't come back. So what?
Exactly. Their loss.
Their loss. Exactly.
Well, I just cannot thank you enough for coming on the show today, Iris. It's such a pleasure to talk to you and to hear this story, which is, such a valuable and important piece of American history and wine history. And I love the fact that, despite all these challenges, and they were great, you are this wonderful, generous soul of success and wanting to pass that on. And that makes me really happy, and it makes me hopeful. And I think we all need that, particularly coming up on our 4th of July weekend, when things don't look that great for our country. I think someone like you is a leading light, and we need to celebrate that more in the wine world and in our political world too.
We have to stick together as women, especially now, because there's no certainty here. So we have to be strong. And we have to continue in our drive for success and to be on top. I'd like to close with a Bob Marley quote.
Oh, please do.
He says, "Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds.
That's a great quote.
And I say in my book, and so I did, and so can everyone else. So can every young woman, woman of color, young men, men of color.
Thank you so much, Iris. I feel inspired on a late Friday night. I really feel so happy to have spoken to you, and I'm so grateful that you came on the podcast. I really appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to reading your book. And I hope that others really take notice of the example and the high bar that you have set for people in our industry to keep moving forward. As you said, keep going.
Keep going. Thank you so much, Cynthia. It's been a pleasure, a real pleasure for me indeed. Thank you so much for inviting me on your show.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode brought to you by the Wine to Wine Business Forum 2022. This year will mark the 9th edition of the forum, to be held on November 7th and 8th, 2022, in Verona, Italy. Remember, the second early bird discount on tickets will be available until September 18th. For more information, please visit us at winetowine.net. Hi guys, I'm Joy Livingston and I am the producer of the Italian Wine Podcast. Thank you for listening. We are the only wine podcast that has been doing a daily show since the pandemic began. This is a labor of love and we are committed to bringing you free content every day. Of course, this takes time and effort, not to mention the cost of equipment, production, and editing. We would be grateful for your donations, suggestions, requests, and ideas. For more information on how to get in touch, go to ItalianWinePodcast.com.